Now, it's a coincidence that we have this interview today, given the fact that the international situation is really increasing in drama, given the shutdown of the U.S. government. And it's a completely irrational situation which has the potential of creating a complete meltdown of the financial system. And it just makes clear that, danger exists that if the chaos erupts out of that, then the whole world could suffer the fate which happened in Cyprus several months ago, because bail-in legislation is well under the way in the United States, but also in Europe. So, do you have any comment on this extremely hot and extremely dangerous situation from your point of view?
Yes, we agree with what you said, that what happens in the United States, it would be a very catastrophic consequence to extend further unless it is resolved. It would be an overall situation in worse dimensions than what was happening in Cyprus. It would affect not only some of the countries, but almost, I could say, over 95% of the international countries in many ways.
And it's important to mention as well that while this has happened in the US and they've had to send the public sector workers home, this has already happened in Greece. I think they announced that I can't remember how many exactly were sent home immediately, but they're planning to reduce the public sector by about 25,000, which is small by comparison to the situation in the United States. Which of course means that there is already the precedent for it, but the consequences, of course, from the US are going to be felt much more painfully around the world.
Yes, okay, so given the fact that this danger is really threatening the life and livelihood of all the people in Europe and the United States, can you please give our listeners and viewers a picture of what is happening now in Cyprus? Because when the crisis happened in March, all the media was talking about it, but half a year later, there is almost nothing in the international media. So what are the effects of these measures?
First of all, I must say that all this lack of publicity is a result of the governmental inactivity to bring anything to the forum of the international community, and is part of the policy they follow in order to keep the people under control, not to protest, but to do exactly as they are told by the Troika. We originally heard that there would be a haircut of 60%, then later they debated a haircut of 37.5%, but now we have a haircut of 200,000 or 47.5%. And my information is from some of my clients that this has already been adopted, that people are losing their money, and this haircut has been occurring in a large number of savings, which leads to the great despondency of the people that this was done without them being informed of what was going on, or even being advised as to how much they're going to lose. We have sent you over a report by one of our clients, who is also a lawyer, which points how tragically they removed all his savings, leaving him with no money, with no information given, and with no respect to the fact that he is a pensioner. And that the savings of £270,000 was a once and for all payment given to him after he left his work as a lawyer in-house for a banking institution. The tragedy is still continuing, to the effect that those of the people who were below 100,000 and who are left out of the cuts are suffering even more now, because the people who had the haircut over 200,000 are people who hold money in the business world, and therefore the whole of the business life of the island has come to a standstill, particularly the building trade, because from the year 1996 to the year 2007, the building trade was one of the largest industries in the island. Now everything has been abandoned. One visits empty sites like ghost towns. I've been personally myself to see establishments in Bafos and in Larnaca, and the houses are deteriorating. Nothing can be done about it. There is no money. And the result of which is the lack of any funding, and the government is forbidding any funding from the banks above a certain level. The unemployment has considerably increased. I must say that although the figures are kept under cover, the unemployment, the way I see it myself by visiting Cyprus, is quite well over 47%, very comfortably. The unemployment is even greater amongst the immigrants. I could say that almost all the immigrant workers who were there in Cyprus during the flourishing years are now entirely with no jobs and without any money to return to their countries, and they are preserved and fed by Sysitia, what we call public canteens, by some benevolent and charitable organizations. There is a great despondency, there is a great deal of depression. It is a shame, because today is the Cyprus Independence Date, the anniversary of the Cyprus Independence, the 1st of October since 1959, and it is an anniversary that is greeted by people with a great deal of sadness, because in 1959, on the 1st of October, we moved out of the colonial rule with a relatively not free constitution, which was controlled by NATO and some of the other colonial powers. And we have gradually moved to establish a flourishing economy despite all the political problems we had. We had a flourishing pound, which goes much higher than the British sterling. We have been doing extremely well, and suddenly, by entering into the euro ourselves, we found ourselves to reach the present situation. If I may continue, the present situation was quite well known to the central bank for some time. It was also known to the banks in Cyprus, because it was partly also the fault of the banks as they are organizing today. I mentioned earlier the building trade. The banks were given loans to various people coming from abroad to buy summer holiday places or to buy small flats to use them as an investment. We have a number of over 50,000 such people from abroad, from Europe, particularly England, who bought properties in the island, who had never been asked whether they would be able to pay their loans on these properties, who have never been checked whether they would be able to continue in their present employment in order to pay for these loans. The banks opened their coffers, which means the depositors' money, and they gave out a lot of loans to these foreign so-called investors or buyers who never intended to pay these loans, and the result of which you've got 50,000 people owing on the average of 150,000 euro, which brings it quite above the present loan given by the Troika to Cyprus. So, in effect, what we have here is the faults of the banks, the fault of the central bank, continuously giving out money from the depositors, not separating itself between the commercial sector with the depositors and the investment sector, going completely bankrupt. This to the knowledge of the central bank in Europe as well. Down to the year 2011, the Laiki Bank, which is now supposedly been put into bankruptcy and the assets were taken over by the Bank of Cyprus, was encouraged by the Commission to buy the Greek bonds, which were worthless, leading to its complete financial annihilation. And this is the situation that we had in Cyprus for a long time. The present situation was created by the banks and also by the encouragement received by the Commission and the European Central Bank. The present situation with Cyprus is that we've got an island which is placed in the historical position of the Middle East, which could survive and can survive without any troika and without any loans. Because from my knowledge and my connections with the Middle East, particularly the areas of Iraq, Kurdistan and other countries, Cyprus is looked upon by the Middle East as being a safe trading haven where they could leave their trade, their offices, and to use the banking system for their businesses. Today it's impossible to do so. Cyprus used to be a tourist paradise, and it's still a tourist paradise. But the present situation has removed even the tourists for the island, because a lot of the hotel businesses are reducing their services and they are closing. Most of the publicity put on the island gives a reflection of sadness. This is the island of the Troika. This is the island of the Troika's template, where all the people have been deprived of their money. Therefore, let's not go there. I have seen it reflected with the tourist trade this year. Cyprus has been reduced because of its size to a slave nation. And I feel ashamed because I come from that island, and I do not wish to see my people become slaves to the oligarchs of Europe. I like to see my country to survive on an equality rights, to see all the people with smiles on their face with no interference. My campaign in Cyprus, and we have set a committee here in London, which is to unite people against the troikas and the change of the banking system in the European countries, and we are enlisting a large number of members now, is to see my country becoming independent, to be able to decide for its economies, to be able to throw euro out of the island, to be able to get out of the troika systems, which is a commission, the central bank and the International Monetary Fund, and to survive as it is survived for thousands of years. Unfortunately, the liberty of my country is now being suppressed by these people from Europe, who are not really looking after the welfare of the island or the welfare of the other countries that they submitted to the rules of the Troika, but only their personal financial interests, which end up accumulating into a system of dictatorial rule for their advantage.
Well, I think this is very clear, and the fact, you know, if you look at what is happening in Cyprus, what is happening in Greece, the media in Europe are completely 100% blocking this reality out.
Yes.
What is this great European idea of peace and working together if people are being reduced to a status like before the introduction of the printing press, where only those who spoke Latin anything, and the other people were kept in ignorance.
Yeah, that's correct.
I'm thankful, but let me go back to this question. You answered most of what I had planned to ask you at this point, but let me ask you, what is since the big propaganda line was that the haircut is only for people with accounts above 100,000, and that the people below 100,000 would be spared. How did this bailout of bail-in of depositors above 100,000 euro affect the whole economy, and subsequently also the people with accounts below 100,000? Because I think that this is a very important message.
Yes, the people below 100,000 are the people who belong to, I don't want to use the word class, but to the lower and middle class. These people were depending for their own work, for their own employment, on those of the people who had deposits over 100,000 and over, which is the media businesses. These media businesses now are shut. Further, the deposits were put for pension funds have been completely eliminated. So therefore, a large number of people who belong to those below 100,000, they haven't got anything left with regard to looking in the future for receiving any pension security. With the present lack of trade and movement in Cyprus, the people of 100,000 are far greater victims than those, I must say, who have got savings above 200,000. I could see every day the situation is reported to me, and as I see it because I frequently travel to Cyprus, that all the small businesses have closed down. Yesterday I was speaking to a small trader, a built-in trader, who told me that he has saving approximately 92,000 euro, But this is no good to him because he cannot trade, as the big businesses which depended on the bigger money are no longer functioning. Even materials. Companies which sold building materials are now closed down. There is no movement, there is no appetite for work. So the sort of boosting by the Troika, as they say, of our business and to make the island survive financially is not working. What it works here is that their measures have led completely to the annihilation of the working life in Cyprus and of the business life in Cyprus. It's been destroying gradually any structure that we had for a long-term economy. And I'm afraid that a lot of the foreign investments, business people who would like to come and invest in Cyprus are no longer coming. They are not putting any investment. So how is this island going to survive in the long term with these Troika measures? As far as I'm concerned, the government should have called a referendum to ask the people to vote. But they were told by the Troika not to call a referendum. That is the reason they have not called a referendum. In the same way that in Greece now they want to go to an election and they are told by the Commission that they shouldn't have an election. So Europe of beauty and Europe of good business and good relationships with the people as they are making out is not working. This is not the Europe that they are promoting. This is a different kind of Europe, which closes upon the days of the Roman dictatorship or of the Persian Empire satrapies. I have a classical background prior to my law degree, and I can really describe what is happening today in Central Europe and Germany as being a hierarchy in the same system as of the old Persia, where you have the king of the kings, and then the king of the kings planting several satraps in the rest of the world in order to rule them financially and in all other respects. So what we have in Cyprus is the establishment of a satrapy of the Troika, and not allowing the people to rule their own lives. And Europe could be described as being the Persepolis of antiquity, a king of the kings in Germany, and regulating the rest of the European economies and depriving people of their independence. That's how I would compare it.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned about the not being able to put it to a public vote, whereas President Anastasiades said to the Commission of Inquiry that he was not even able to have any recourse to the Court of Justice. So not only have the people not been consulted, neither have the judiciary. But to go back to the people under €100,000, there was no exception made for the extent of the credit controls. You might still have €100,000 in the bank, but you can only withdraw 300 per day in cash, make a 15,000 transaction per month. You're not allowed to borrow money for more than, or the banks are not allowed to lend money for more than 5 years. So your chance of getting a mortgage and buying a property has just been taken away from you. And there's a €5,000 limit on using your credit card in the few places that will still take them. And I think that most places won't even cash a cheque.
They don't. They don't cash a check. No, they don't trust a check.
What you say is really true, because in Greece also, you know, the so-called stability of the system is all of a sudden a value more important than democracy. This is ridiculous.
That's absolutely true.
But they are preparing, and I'm quite afraid that they are preparing it for a very short period from now. It may even be triggered by this U.S. crisis. But they're preparing this bail-in for all of Europe and all of the United States. Now, this bail-in law was written by the EU Commission with the aid of the International Swap and Derivative Association, ISDA, which explicitly talks about the so-called creditor hierarchy. And in Europe, they're also talking now about the cascade according to which the different creditors and depositors will be expropriated. What can you tell us from your experience from Cyprus from that?
Well, I see that they're following the rules, which is the bankruptcy rules, about the country declaring bankrupt and the the bankruptcy is occurring through the Troika, and they have a priority of creditors to expropriate their money, starting with the largest sums of money and going down to the lowest scale. But in the process of it, the whole system, as my colleague, the other lawyer who sent you the report, in the process of it, they get themselves very confused and they change the rules and they take everything away without any hierarchy followed whatsoever. This is what I have got. Have you got any comments yourself?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's because it's been tried to be implemented so quickly, there is a great confusion as to exactly how it's operating, and the urgency with which they've wanted to recapitalise the banks has been the main driving factor in that. I think that they have tried to follow the same rules of insolvency, and what you have in the form of the BailIn is that it's a partial insolvency. What they're giving you is, we're going to make the bank responsible for part of its debt, but not all of them, and it's going to honour that immediately. And it's trying to follow the same hierarchy you would have if the bank was completely declared insolvent, which you would be only better off by the fact that the bank isn't being declared completely insolvent. But on what you say about it being a model for the whole of Europe, I think it was the Dutch finance minister that said that it was going to become the template
for the whole of Europe.
There was an interesting article back in April by a Paul de Groot from the Centre of European Policy Studies that was arguing along the lines that actually it's going to become the template for the debtor nations rather than the creditor nations. If you look at how they've started structuring this banking union, the European Central Bank is getting supervisory powers over the largest 130 to 150 banks, which will amount to about 85% of the banking system.
Yes.
And this new resolution authority is going to have the same kind of structure.
Yeah.
So the idea is that they want a joint supervision of the banking system and to have a common system for resolving the systemically important banks, but it's not necessarily going to be a template for everywhere in all situations.
Yes, I mean, Mr. Crother puts it quite clearly that the new BailIn doctrine, a recipe for banking crisis and depression in the Eurozone.
Yeah.
And I think that really is the epitome of what they're doing in Cyprus and all over the world.
Yes, I mean, I think we're going to see a lot more bail-ins, particularly in countries like Spain and Italy, and of course Greece, where they've entered into periods of quite severe political instability. I mean, there were 5 ministers resigned from the Italian government the other day. I think it was towards the end of last week. The week before, there was mass protests in Catalonia for independence that are threatening for a referendum next year, or to turn their regional elections in 2016 into
I believe it is going to lead to some kind of rebellion in the South Mediterranean countries, because these are from the very beginning, you could see about 20 or 25 years ago, when all this tension to the European Union began, that the South Mediterranean countries were given different terms for entering into the European Union. And I believe once I went to Gastrit to see Mr. Andreas Papandreou, the Prime Minister of Greece, relating to some issue relating to a crisis in Cyprus. And the commentary there was by some politicians that there was a strong division between the Mediterranean countries and the northern European countries. From that time onwards, one could know that the Mediterranean countries, mainly agricultural and tourist countries, were to be treated with deference as compared to the northern countries. And this is what is happening today. Most of the countries who have been suffering these measures, the bail-ins and certain bailouts, are the Mediterranean countries. First, you've got Greece, Italy, Portugal, Of course, you have Ireland in the north, and Ireland has had normally a great deal of economic instability, and Cyprus. So the division between the north and the south is occurring. So how far are the Mediterranean countries going to stand up, and the peoples of the Mediterranean countries are going to endure this pressure of the various troikas? This is a question. Already we've seen that there are a lot of demonstrations and a great deal of movements which may lead to anarchy and may lead also to the rise of the extreme right wings, as it happens in Greece now with the Golden Dawn. So we are in a dangerous situation that the South Mediterranean would have to decide the regime they would have to follow, whether they want to stay in within the Eurozone and within the Troika zone, or they would come out of it, go back to their old currencies, take control of their economies in order to improve the present situation and keep the countries together. This is an important time for the Mediterranean countries to decide this big question. Are we going to remain within the Eurozone and within the Euro? Are we going to be left independent and look after our affairs independently as we used to do before? Because I believe all the countries would be able to carry on the economic problems and the financial problems and resolve them if they are left alone. Today, with the interference of people from outside their own countries who do not look after the interests of the countries that are suffering themselves, but only the financial interests of a clique within the Eurozone, could lead to far greater problems. And what we want Cyprus particularly to do is to abandon the Euro and to abandon all this nonsense and to start a life of its own as it had for many, many years. Even under colonial rule, we are able to do our economic life on our own and to thrive, have a much better life, and to have better business than we have today. So if colonial rule seems to be better, imagine what Troika is like today.
Well, I totally agree with you that this intention of making this difference between the North and the South is very apparent.
Yeah.
But the problem, as I see it, and the situation is, underlined by what happens in the United States. For the Detroit, is exactly like Cyprus.
Yeah.
They try to expropriate, or they're still negotiating, but they're trying to expropriate the pensioners by 95% of their life's work. They want to compensate the same banks and traders who sold fraudulent swaps to the city, which triggered this whole problem. They want to compensate them by 80%. So there was already Time magazine having the cover, "Is Your City Next?" So, even if the intention is to make this difference between the North and the South, the problem is systemic.
It's systemic, yes.
U.S. and Europe, the transatlantic zone, is utterly bankrupt. And, the danger is that if they go for a bail-in, then chaos in all of Europe and all of the United States will be the result.
Yeah, but this is it. We are led to that situation.
Well, the repercussions of the bail-in as it's going to pan out in Cyprus, I think it's very much going to give countries that are able to bail out their banks the incentive to do so. They're not going to... If a country is able to bail out its bank in the form of loans or taking stock in it or even nationalising it, any country in Northern Europe that's got the capacity to do that, I think it will undertake it because of how everything's going to react in Greece and in Cyprus and the rest of the south.
I believe that we have to establish a new banking system in which the depositor would be respected, the deposit will be left saved away from the investment side of the bank, that we have to keep control of what is going on with the banks. If the bank is getting down, we should allow it to close down instead of trying to bail it out, as it happened now with the Laiki Bank, as a result of which we have the intervention of the Troika. Right. Also, the banks in Cyprus, as I said earlier, were left without any supervision. They were giving out money to people who would never pay that money. I calculated that if you multiply 30,000 people by 200,000 euro each who borrowed from the banks in Cyprus for purchasing properties, and they are not paying them now. It involves that we are nearly £10 billion that we would have got for these loans, which are never going to be returned. Now, the central bank in Cyprus, which has been directed by the central bank in Europe, under a directive, had the duty to supervise what is going on, and they have failed to do so. In addition, they imposed the Swiss franc loans. The Swiss franc loans increased the rates as the time went because of the crisis, and a lot of the people in the below 100,000 euro in their bank accounts in Cyprus own money in Swiss francs for their purchase of their own properties, the residential properties, which they can't pay today. As lawyers who have a great deal of litigation in Cyprus on account of this, on account of the Swiss franc loans, and as a matter of fact, Professor Tridimas, who will be speaking at the meeting in Nicosia on the 17th of October, has also been instructed by people to take the issue of the Swiss franc to the European Court of Justice, assisted by us, and to sue the central bank in Europe for failing to supervise this giving of Swiss francs without any proper advice or warning or anything whatsoever to the borrower. So there are a lot of things happening in Europe today, and they would result in a great deal of litigation and in a great deal of upheaval, demonstrations, etc. But at the same time, there will be a lot of suffering. Pensioners, for example, already we know in Cyprus that most of the pensioners cannot have their pensions as they used to receive them. They have suffered in Greece considerable cuts of their pensions. They have to depend on their children. Most of their children haven't got jobs today. In Athens, people are committing suicide. Many people committed suicide, and it's the first history in the history of Greece, the first time that so many people have committed suicide because of the Troika and the various activities of the bail-in and the bail-out. Similarly, in Cyprus, there are reported suicides because of the situation that old people particularly have found themselves in. We haven't got many provisions relating to the disabled, and now the disabled provisions have been seriously crippled, and families cannot even look after disabled relatives to such an extent, and the crisis is continuing every day. So when is it going to be an end of it? I believe that the Cyprus people should take their fate in their own hands, and they should stand up united, like the rest of Europe, and to say enough is enough. We want to take the life of our country in our hands.
Sorry, my name is Daniel. I'm an assistant to Helga.
Yes.
You brought up point. You hit the nail right on the head just before when you said about the banking system and the fact that the ECB is, being appointed now as a supervisor.
Yeah.
Back to Neil, when you were talking about the way the hierarchy was in the BailIn being somehow correspondent to an insolvency. Well, that's exactly what isn't happening, because in all this discussion about the BailIn on the sidelines, the ISDA and the ECB has made clear that derivatives would be excluded from the BailIn, because they make exactly the point, and that's actually the big clue to where the real problem lies with this banking system, that they do not want to touch the derivatives, which are worldwide, at a conservative estimate of 700 trillion, according to the bank settlements.
Actually, it's 1.4 quadrillion.
However you measure it, right? But that's the clue there, that these derivatives are being excluded from any kind of BailIn procedure. That they even admit that it cannot be counted as capital because it is not capital.
Yes, I believe the ISDA said it counted as a trade debt.
Because it suits them.
Yeah, I mean, the ISDA exists to protect its members and its interests, so to expect it to say anything else is, it's not. But I think with the
continuation of the bailout, because, at the last FOMC meeting, Bernanke, who had announced that he would taper the quantitative easing, which already led to a huge market vacillation, they did not dare to do it. So while they are doing this bail-in preparation, the bailout, the printing of money, the liquidity pumping is continuing. And, that is another danger because it's already leading to a hyperinflationary explosion, visible in the area of rents,
yes,
of food.
Yes.
This is an expropriation of the population on top of this one. So, I think in light of all of this, I would like you to comment on the question of the Glass-Steagall fight because, in the United States, you have right now a very serious movement of 75 congressmen, 10 senators, and 25 of 50 states who already have implemented resolutions for Glass-Steagall. I would like you to, if you want, to address the American congressmen, how should they look at their historical responsibility in respect to implementing Glass-Steagall before this whole thing detonates into total chaos in the transatlantic region?
Well, I believe the Glass-Steagall, as I see it myself, I don't know how the Cyprus government sees it, but as I see it myself, and a lot of my colleagues believe it would be a proper solution for what is happening in Cyprus. We need to educate people about this. Obviously, the examples of what we have seen today with the banks further justifies the Glass-Steagall in order to protect the commercial section of the bank, the deposits put by the citizens. I am a great supporter of the Glass-Steagall. I have read quite a lot about it, and in fact, various politicians in the UK are in favour of it. I think it's Miss Vincent Cable,
the Secretary of State for Business.
For Business, yes, is in support of it. And the support is also growing. In Cyprus, the Glass-Steagall is known by some of the economists, but the average citizen doesn't know much about it. And we, through the Anglo-Hellenic and Cypriot Law Association, we're trying to educate people about this and to bring it about to be adopted by the banks. We have over 1,000 clients who are the victims of the banks. And this is a very serious problem. And therefore, on the basis of the fact that we have the evidence of all these people, the evidence that goes to the court, that they are in the position they are because of the present banking system, and indeed the banks are the reasons for their impoverishment and bankruptcy, we would advocate the Glass-Steagall system through the organization to the institutions there, and even amongst the politicians, because it's about time that the little island of Cyprus should have a healthy banking system to assist the depositors who are now being destroyed, and together with the depositors, everything else.
Yeah, I mean, with the, I think one of the main things from a legal perspective is that when you enter into a contract or a kind of investment, you have to understand the risks that you're taking on. And what's happened in the banking system in the past is that people have been exposed to risks that they didn't assume when they were taking it out. When you make a deposit into a bank, you don't assume that money's going to go into high-risk investing instruments. The same is true of our main cases, where people bought into properties in Cyprus using foreign exchange mortgages. They were led to believe that these mortgages were ordinary mortgages that they would have from any high street bank in the UK, when actually what they were getting was a high-risk foreign exchange investment instrument. So as a sort of simple matter of law, are you being proper? Is the bank doing its due diligence in making you aware of the risk, not just for things like the mortgages, but just putting a deposit in the bank? Does the bank advise you of the risks in the bank becoming insolvent? What the likelihood of that being? Because, of course, for a bank that's exclusively a commercial bank, the risk is significantly lower.
But they haven't done so.
No.
We have challenged the European Commission. We paid 2 visits to the European Commission and their legal secretariat there twice as to this situation. And the answer is, I'm afraid we haven't got any definite system with regard to the banks. And as regards the properties, there is hardly any regulation affecting the properties, which is, yes, that's true.
Well,
that the criminal character of this banking system is without any doubt, because if you look at the combination of drug money laundering,
yes,
for which the banks pay little fines, which are already counted in the operating budget, the LIBOR interest rate manipulation, which defrauded people over more than 2 decades by a 3-digit billion figure. If you look at the fraudulent selling of products to their customers,
that's true,
where they know already that they're cheating, as it occurred in the case of Goldman Sachs and Deutsche Bank many times and so on. I think this banking system has become a complete monster.
It is true.
It has corrupted the political system. And when we tried, for example, to reintroduce a Pecora commission, which was done by Franklin D. Roosevelt in the 30s, German politicians whom we contacted about that said that there is not even an initial suspicion which would justify the introduction of such a commission. So we really need to put the Pecora commission on the agenda, because the crimes committed are so horrendous. It is without precedent.
Yes,
now,
we have the evidence.
I'll ask you a last question.
Yes.
Because I think that, the Troika is ruining the peoples of Southern Europe, but, they are also doing harm to Germany, which I not see in the same way, but I'm German and I can see what it does to Germany. But the other major complaint I have is that this European Commission and this EU is not representing the soul of Europe.
No, it is true.
They are oligarchs, they are pursuing their personal interests. Where is the soul of Greece, of Cyprus, of Germany, of France? Where are the great classical traditions of Europe represented? So from my standpoint, this EU has become a suffocating dictatorship.
It is.
Which is ruining the happiness of the people, and therefore we should throw it off as a yoke, because it is no longer representing Europe. I think we must go back to the classical traditions, when our people contributed to universal history, and that has to be the future of Europe.
Yes, it is true what you say, and this is what we all feel, that the great tradition of Europe, the great classical tradition and civilization of Europe has been completely suppressed. There is no discussion about it. What we have today in Europe is an artificial state of Europe, which has got no soul apart from a huge bureaucracy in Brussels. And the rest of the populations of Europe have become the robots against this enormous bureaucracy. I go frequently to Brussels because I campaign against the banks, and I campaign also for the way they're treating people and also the way they treated the Middle East in many ways. There are a lot of products in Europe which are thrown into the sea in order to keep the prices competitive. So the Europe that I dreamt myself, united and to be the glamour of civilization and culture, is no longer there. It's an artificial, technical Europe for enriching the minority within Europe. And that's what I see. The democratic ideas which came from Greece, etc., are no longer there. Democracy is suppressed to the interest of the few, to the enrichment of the few, and the deprivation of the freedoms of the majority of the European people. I like to see the rise of civilization of Europe. I like to see the classical idea of the democracy, where all the people are represented equally. And this is not happening today. The idea in Greece, where everybody was elected by lot to participate, which means an absolute equality, doesn't exist in Europe. The education in Europe is not based on educating people on the culture of Europe. It's educating people in order to suffer the regime of Europe, which is deprived of every liberties. What they're teaching to the schools today, the secondary education, about the European Union, it concentrates entirely or how beneficial it is to have a union for commercial reasons, but they don't teach the kids at the schools, which I've observed many times, how their liberties have been suppressed and that they're growing in a society of robots. And I want to go back to classical Greece and the classical civilization, which is Renaissance of Europe, and it would help to resurrect Europe again. I remember many years ago that I established a seminar within the European Parliament, and in which an earthly gentleman today, Mr. Kasimatis, was present to speak from Greece, a very famous person. And the subject of the seminar was classicism, the symbol of unity of Europe. And what I meant with classicism, it meant that rich civilization of Europe, which has now been destroyed and been suppressed. So there is nothing of this kind in the Europe of today, but an oligarchy for the economic and feudal interest of the few.
Yes, thank you. I fully agree, because government has to be with the consensus of the governed. Yes. And if that consensus is not there, then we are talking about dictatorship.
And that's what it is.
Yes. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Make sure that what you said will get out as widely as possible. Because I think we need to have a totally different conception of Europe.
Definitely.
So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the interview. Thank you.